Penn State is getting ready to wrap up its defensive coordinator search, and honestly, there is not a bad choice with who they could go with at that spot.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. My name is Seyko. I am your host of the show. We are talking about Penn State defensive coordinators. We'll also talk about the wide receiver room and if Penn State should be the 2025 title favorite. And who better to help me than Pat Koerbler of Black Shoe Diaries to talk about all of this in a live show. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. And right now, new customers can bet $5 and you will get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Of course, let us know your thoughts in the live chat. Pat, thank you so much for the time, especially on this Wednesday evening here, Wednesday night. And Penn State's defensive coordinator search really ramped up here. And there's just a lot of board of trustees are getting ready to meet on Friday. There was a nice little charter flight out to Los Angeles. They conducted some other interviews with prospective coordinators. And when I look at all the names that have been mentioned, aside from some of the long shots, like originally like a Jim Knowles and an Al Golden, of the ones that are truly realistically available, there is not a bad choice for Penn State. I feel like they cannot mess this up.
As always, Zach, thank you for having me on. And yeah, I echo your point. And it takes me back to last year when Penn State hired Tom Allen. And this is not sour grapes because you can go back in my Twitter. You can see what I wrote on BSD. Mm-hmm. I was not the biggest fan of the Tom Allen hire. But even when it was made, it wasn't like, oh, this means the defense is going to be bad. Because that's just kind of where Penn State's defense is at this point. And it was last year and it is this year that they're just so talented. And I know we're going to talk about, 2025 title favorites and stuff like that, but right. Getting Deni Dennis on that, getting Zane Duran, having Tony Rojas and Don Bluca back at linebacker. We can save that talk for a little bit later on, but yeah, I mean, this is one of the, elite jobs in the sport at this point is becoming Penn State's defensive coordinator. You look at Tom Allen, he's able to get a $2 million gig to go live in South Carolina where he wants to be. Look at Manny Diaz, gets to be the head coach at an ACC school. Look at Brent Pry, also became the head coach at a ACC school, one of his dream jobs in Virginia Tech. So I think that if you're a defensive coordinator, and I know we'll get into some names here in a second, if you're a defense coordinator out there, this Penn State job is a ticket to kind of whatever you want, whether that's being a head coach or whether that's being an NFL defensive coordinator.
And I think that's the case right now. I don't know that I should invoke Mike Yurcich's name, but Andy Kotelnicki is setting it up that way, that if you want to take a leap forward in your coaching career, be one of Penn State's coordinators, either offensively or defensively now with the precedent that Andy Kotelnicki is setting. But talking about defense, there's a handful of names that Penn State has really keyed in on here. This is the name, and especially given, the flight arrangements for today. So this is Penn State sending a plane that people were able to find out to the Los Angeles area. Well, what exactly does that mean? That means that there are people strategically going to visit D'Anton Lynn. And Pat, I've been echoing this sentiment for the entire it's almost been, I guess, a few days, a week now in this case, or I guess not that long, 3 days since Tom Allen had ultimately taken the job. Couple days, yeah, really. And I said it's D'Anton Lynn. If you can get D'Anton Lynn, that is the home run, because Jim Knowles, Al Golden, probably not happening. And honestly, I would still take D'Anton Lynn over the two of them because he is innovative. Yes, he is fairly new to play calling duties. He's also played at Penn State. But this is the premier candidate above anybody else that we're going to mention in this case, Bryant, Haines, or anybody else. Who is your top candidate? Because for me personally, it's Lynn, and then everybody else after that.
I agree with you, Zach. I think Lynn he's certainly high up there for me. I put together a list on blackshoediaries.com. So if you want to go out and check out that list, again, some of that it's just random names, some that are intriguing, some that, I like a lot, some that I don't. But when I looked basically at all the defense coordinators in college football, sans Jim Knowles, I did not include him on that list, of who would I like to see Penn State go out and get, I kind of did settle on, I really like Dan Lynn, I really liked Indiana's Brian Haines, and I really like South Carolina's Clayton White. There's been some smoke and some murmurs, if you go out on Twitter and search around, that Brian Haines in Indiana is involved in this job, and certainly that Dan Lynn at USC is as well. And yeah, I mean, I know that a lot of fans, and even last year when they hired Tom Allen, the idea with Tom Allen was that, he's coming off being a head coach, struggled in those last couple of years at Indiana. Older guy, but not as old as people think. I think he's like 53, 54, 55, but right. An older guy, maybe he's going to be able to stay a little bit longer. And I think that Penn State and James Franklin did realize that, it's going to take a pretty unique situation or case to get somebody to, just stay as a defense coordinator or offense coordinator for a very long time. And Penn State certainly has that. When you look at, like Terry Smith, cornerback coach, has been at Penn State forever and seems pretty happy here. So the idea that you're going to go out and find this defense coordinator that is a championship quality guy that is going to just live in State College for the next 10 years and has no aspirations beyond that, I don't know how realistic that is. So you kind of take that away, because I think for a lot of people, when you look at Dan Lynn, guy in his mid-30s, probably has an NFL future as a defense coordinator if he wants it, or if he wants to be a college head coach. That's probably going to happen in the next 3 to 4 years. But I think if you're Penn State, you're all in on 2025. And I know I keep bringing up 2025, which is going to be a discussion for us a little bit later on, but you're all in on 2025. And I think that Lynn is the type of defense coordinator that can take you there. He, has those NFL chops, coaching with the Ravens for a couple of years, goes to UCLA last year and just has literally one of the top 3 defenses, depending upon the metrics that you look at, in the country, not the Pac-12, not the Big Ten, in the entire country at a place like UCLA. And then goes to USC this year. And was that Trojan defense elite? No.
But they made massive strides.
Yes, absolutely horrendous in 2023, and not totally stinky in 2024, which is a good thing for Lynn. And if you're a Penn State fan, or if you're James Franklin, you're looking at that, what can he do with what Penn State has on defense? And I think you get excited about that. So Lynn is certainly in my top group of guys.
I can't imagine that they're going to do many, if any, more interviews in this case. It seems like they've narrowed in on Danton Lynn because they flew out to California to meet with him. They also interviewed with Brian Haines, as you mentioned, Indiana defensive coordinator, and then somebody that was going to immediately, it went on those initial lists. Ephraim Banda, a Manny Diaz disciple, if you will, somebody that was part of that coaching tree. He is currently in the NFL as a position coach for the Cleveland Browns. Do you think Penn State agrees with us that it's Danton Lynn's job to lose? How do you think they rank these available coordinators? And then Anthony Poindexter is somebody else that's in-house that they're going to go with. I've seen Dan Connor thrown around, right? I don't think that was a really kind of, unfortunately, just because of timing and how we say, hey, they need to go all in on 2025. That was a last-ditch result if everybody was going to turn it down here. How do you think Penn State ranks their options at coordinator? Is it Lynn at the top? Is it going with in promoting Anthony Poindexter? Because he has been so patient, and he's been the co-DC for the past few seasons.
It's always tough to rank them just because we don't know exact specifics on what James Franklin wants and some of the other things. Like, okay, we kind of think that he does like that Manny Diaz method, and that's why Ephraim Banda's the Browns safeties coach is being included in this, because James obviously likes what Diaz was doing as far as, heavy blitzing, more so man than zone, things like that. But just even as far as what I talked about before, how long are you going to stay at a job? I know in the past that Franklin has really wanted more than 1 year commitments. I know that was a thing, even going back to Joe Moorhead, when Penn State was not the creme de la creme, when Joe was taking that job, going from Fordham to Penn State, was, hey, don't really want you just to use this as a 1 year stepping stone. After that, sure, but
2 years. Have some
exactly,
decency.
2 years. And that's what we're seeing with Koerbler, right? So, you look at that with Lynn, you have to take that in consideration. You have to look at Brian Haines, for example, really impressive guy, another guy in his mid-30s who's done some really good stuff at James Madison and now Indiana. I know people are going to look at Indiana's schedule and kind of use that against him, but a top 10 defense is a top 10 defense. And even
in 1 year's time.
Indiana, sorry, what was that, Zach?
And in 1 year's time, how quick the turnaround was.
And even in the games that Indiana lost against Ohio State and against Notre Dame, the score certainly didn't look good against Ohio State. Ohio State's offense was gifted a touchdown with a punt block and also returned a punt for a touchdown. The defense actually did pretty well overall, and even against Notre Dame, they gave up that 97-yard run to Jeremiah Love. But other than that, they were pretty strong. It's really Indiana's offense that struggled in that case. Anyway, point I'm trying to make is even someone like Brian Haines, he just signed a new contract like just a couple weeks ago, like might have been a month ago. I think it was just before Indiana's game against Notre Dame for $1.8 million. So, right, Penn State might like Brian Haines a lot. Do they like him enough that, hey, we are going to pay you $2.3 million or whatever it might take to be able to get him here? So it's always tough to rank them in that respect because there are different things that go into it as far as salary, as far as how long you think someone's going to stay, as far as fit on staff. I mean, look at Tom Allen and Penn State. Obviously, he found a perfect fit in Clemson, but maybe things weren't quite as good at Penn State. So just from my perspective, though, yeah, I really like Dan Lynn. I'd be happy with Brian Haines. I mentioned South Carolina's defensive coordinator, Clayton White. He doesn't seem to be involved. I think Michigan State's Joe Rossi. He's a Pittsburgh guy. I'm a little surprised that his name hasn't gotten brought up. But I'm kind of at the point, and even with Dex and Banda, who I think if you ask Penn State fans, there's going to be varying opinions on them as far as Banda just being a safeties coach, has been a defense coordinator in the past at Utah State, but spent the last couple of years as the Brown safeties coach. And then Anthony Poindexter, who he was defense coordinator at UConn, but didn't call the plays. Bob Diaco did. I'm kind of at the point where I trust what James Franklin is doing. And it's kind of how I felt last year, right? When they hired Tom Allen, and I wasn't the biggest fan of Tom Allen or the hire, and Penn State's defense was still pretty damn good this year. So I think whoever they go with, I don't really think that they can go wrong. And to kind of echo what you said at the start of the episode.
And with the Board of Trustees meeting to approve, a big financial decision on Friday, that's where this is going to turn. So a decision's going to happen sooner rather than later. I really think it is down to, again, this is probably just because you and I personally agree that Danton Lynn is the top choice. Anthony Poindexter in-house, Brian Haines, Banda, the Cleveland Browns safeties coach. Again, someone who's worked with Manny Diaz extensively throughout his career. There's not a bad choice here. And as much as I think Dan Connor's a great coach, but like we have agreed that 2025, you need to go all in. And that's why it's just not right for someone to settle into their role. They need to be ready to go right now, and you need play calling experience. So maybe that's where, Poindexter hasn't been that, but he has been the co-DC, and he's been around at Penn State for quite some time. But let's pivot. Let's pivot to other position groups. Wide receiver room is actually hitting that full reset. Is it the wide receivers? Marcus Hagens still is employed. That's going to be surprising for some people, but Pat, let's make sense of all of that here on this live edition of Locked On Nittany Lions when we return here on the show. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. And right now, new customers can bet $5 and you will get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That is $300 to keep the action going. Yes, $300. The FanDuel Sportsbook app is easy to navigate. There are a variety of bets that will keep every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings, whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs. FanDuel has you covered. And let's look over at FanDuel.com and you can see the lines for the NFL playoffs this upcoming weekend. The Kansas City Chiefs are 8.5-point favorites against the Houston Texans. The Detroit Lions are 9.5-point favorites against the Washington Commanders. Philadelphia Eagles are 6.5-point favorites against the Los Angeles Rams. And the Buffalo Bills are actually 1.5-point underdogs to the Baltimore Ravens at home. If you like those lines, you can bet them over at FanDuel.com. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you will get started with $300 in bonus bets. That is FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And remember, you can check out Pat's work over at Black Shoe Diaries covering Penn State sports also as well, in addition to you, to hear what we do at Locked On Nittany Lions. Pat, let's pick back up with the wide receiver room. Marcus Hagens. What is going on here with the wide receiver room? Because we are seeing this, well, you and I know what is, but to make sense of it for people that, Trey Wallace goes into the portal. Omari Evans goes into the portal, and Penn State at least got something from them. I mean, those were the two best receivers from this past season, and they're in the portal. I mean, the word reset was not used lightly, at least not by me, and I don't think by anybody else. And that's probably a word that you've used to kind of describe how this needed to go. Keandre Lambert-Smith made that decision to move on last cycle, and now it's Omari Evans and Trey Wallace. The common theme here is that here's how Penn State views it, because actions speak louder than words. The guys that are in the wide receiver room are not doing their job, and Marcus Hagens is. Basically, they see it as this. The wide receivers, the veteran wide receivers, are not performing the way that they should, or else they would have moved on from Marcus Hagens. Would they have not?
Yeah, I mean, the wide receiver discourse is just
Well, that's why we're talking about it, right?
Yeah, it's all over the place, and I don't know exactly how I feel about it. I understand the sentiment of fans and people saying the wide receiver room needed a reset. I'm well aware that Omari Evans and Trey Wallace did not have any receptions in the Orange Bowl. Very aware, completely understand. I don't know if I was on board the complete reset. Okay. People like Mekhi Flowers and Tyler Johnson and guys who weren't really seeing playing time. I understand they want to get out and they want to go somewhere where they can play. And honestly, even Omari Evans, he was a bit of a luxury as far as what he was doing at Penn State, which was just being a deep threat. And that's no offense to Omari. He thinks that he can do more. He's going to potentially get that opportunity somewhere else. I think I saw that he's going to visit Syracuse and Texas Tech, so we'll see. But I would have really liked to keep Trey Wallace. And even in the roster reset of this wide receiver room, I still would have liked to have, somebody who had, granted it was, a 16-game season, which kind of skews the stats, but somebody who almost had 50 receptions, someone who had a couple touchdowns and flashed at times. I understand he didn't flash against Ohio State, he didn't flash against Notre Dame, but certainly flashed at times, because the rub on Trey Wallace coming out of school as a high school prospect was that he was a late bloomer. He was somebody who was more focused on basketball for most of his high school career, kind of made the switch to being all in on football a little bit later on. So he was going to need some time to fully develop. I would have liked to keep him. Mm-hmm. And part of that is because of the talent that he is. The other part of that is that I don't know if I necessarily love the wide receiver room behind him, right? It's not like, defensive end or safety, right? At safety, you have Dejon Lane and Babu Toure, two,
sure,
who I think are going to be future all-conference guys, or certainly have that potential. Hagens has been recruiting a little bit better. I like Josiah Brown from the last class. I like Peter Gonzalez from the last class. Of course, I mean, all Penn State fans at this point have to have Tyseer Denmark is the number one.
As a breakout, yeah,
on their forehead, because they kind of need him to be that. But right, I just don't foresee this wide receiver room being completely stacked. And I was kind of working on the wide receiver depth chart, and I understand that Penn State's going to go with a lot of 2 wide receiver looks once again, or more than likely will. But even if that's the case, so you have Kyron Hudson transferred from USC, you have Devontae Ross that transferred from Troy, you have Tyseer Denmark. Let's say those are your top 3 wide receivers. Mm-hmm. After that, it's Liam Clifford, it's Anthony Ivy, it's a redshirt Peter Gonzalez who is out this entire season, and
yes,
we don't have confirmation on what that injury is. One can guess it's probably a knee injury from what we have heard. You have Caden Saunders, who was basically out. I know he fielded some punts at some point this year, but was never really healthy this year, and it's somebody who hasn't quite lived up to expectations. Yeah. So my point being is that I don't know if there's a KJ Hamler coming, that there's a Jahan Dotson coming, that there's a Chris Godwin coming. And I'd feel a little bit different about this roster reset if it felt like, Penn State has some studs coming in. Maybe that happens. Maybe Peter Gonzalez stays healthy and just turns into, a starting level wide receiver right away. Maybe Andrew Olesh, who is 210 pounds, they say, hey, let's not pack 35 pounds on him right away. Let's try to see if we can put him at wide receiver, because he certainly has the athletic numbers to do it. That's going to be my agenda this offseason. Just want to make you aware, Zach. So maybe wide receiver works out. Maybe it doesn't. There's obviously going to be the spring transfer portal period as well, which I assume Penn State's going to be pretty damn aggressive when it comes to wide receivers there. But I would have liked Trey to at least stay for the spring. The same thing that we saw with Keandre Lambert-Smith last year, right? He stayed through the spring and then decided, you know what, I'm out of here. But
there's so many layers that you and I could actually talk about the wide receiver situation going back to the first domino that is Keandre Lambert-Smith and Julian Fleming, and then bringing us back to the present. Unfortunately, we don't have an hour on the show, right? Trying to keep it, between 30 and 40 minutes here. But to sum it all up, I mean, there's so many directions I can take this in. Penn State doesn't need the wide receiver room to be this. They made the national semifinal, for crying out loud, and have won 23 games in 2 seasons with the production that they had at wide receiver. Yes, I would have loved Trey Wallace to be a third option in Penn State's offense, but does Trey Wallace like the idea of that? It's kind of the same thing with Keandre Lambert-Smith. Your offensive coordinator gets fired, and who knows what his relationship with Mike Yurcich was, but I think these the coaches and the wide receivers kind of almost like a business of eval. You kind of at end of the quarter. Well, they have an end of the season evaluation, and I think they're honest with them, and they say, hey, you're going to be competing with Kyron Hudson and Devontae Ross and Tyseer Denmark for volume within this offense. You are not going to be the clear-cut number 1 wide receiver because you couldn't get it done. Yes, against West Virginia and Maryland, that's great. But against Notre Dame and Ohio State, where we needed you to give us something, you did not. And Trey Wallace is probably thinking the same thing. Well, I don't need this. Why should I, move down the depth chart because I wasn't utilized? Who knows how he feels ultimately in the situation? I mean, he had 700 yards. Granted, they played 16 games, but he had over 700 yards, and he would have factored into the offense, but it's kind of the same thing. Keandre Lambert-Smith got a demotion by Julian Fleming coming in and saying, hey, you're going to have to compete with some other guys for playing time. You're not going to be the number 1 X wide receiver anymore. This is going to be a new look offense. And remember, Penn State's just going to be run focused. And that's why I say they don't need an elite wide receiver, at least for 2025, because you have Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen back. You bring in Kyron Hudson and Devontae Ross, who give you specialty skills. Hudson can catch anything you throw at him. He has flypaper hands. He will make any catch that you ask him to. The question is, can he separate? But he can catch anything. He can block like a Julian Fleming. That's what Penn State's looking for there. And then Devontae Ross gives you that speed, gives you that home run threat, makes the safeties respect your passing game enough to give Allen and Singleton some more room in the box. And don't forget, Singleton can catch passes. Katron Allen can catch passes. It is legal to throw the football to running backs. I joked about it at first, but I legitimately think that Andy Kotelnicki's base offense is going to be a wishbone-like formation where you have Singleton, Allen, and some combination of Cam Wallace, Corey Smith, and Quentin Martin, and you're going to run 3 running back sets with 2 tight ends and Khalil Dinkins and Luke Reynolds, Kyron Hudson, Devontae Ross. What's wrong with that? That wins you football games.
I think the question, though, Zach, is right. So with Trey Wallace and Omari Evans, and I know people like to think, right, and Penn State might think this, that Kyron Hudson and Devontae Ross is going to be better than Trey Wallace and Omari Evans. And they might be right on that. But for Penn State to take that next step, and I know I keep teasing this 2025 title favorites thing, but for Penn State to take that next step, right, to not just get to a semifinal, but to win that semifinal and to ultimately win a championship, can you do that with Kyron Hudson and Devontae Ross as your number 1, number 2 wide receivers? And even beyond that, I think the question for me, just knowing that injuries happen, right, that we're going to look at this depth chart and we're going to look at these players, and some of them are going to go down. Abdul Carter was hurt in the Orange Bowl. Kevin Winston Jr. was hurt the entire year. Alonzo Ford, right? Penn State lost a bunch of people throughout the year.
You need depth.
If a Devontae Ross goes down, if a Kyron Hudson goes down, how comfortable do you feel about that wide receiver room? And I understand that it can be, I don't envy Penn State's position of trying to keep the younger guys happy enough that you don't see a total mass exodus from guys you like, but also trying to bring people in. So I think that's kind of the question for Penn State. Is Kyron Hudson and Devontae Ross, even if they stay healthy, are they good enough for Penn State to take that next step, knowing that you are losing Tyler Warren, who is a massive piece to lose?
And that's where Singleton and Allen being back helps. The offensive line, at least a bulk of it, right? Sal Wormley's going off to the NFL, but you get a TJ Shanahan out of the portal. You have all those tight ends. You have Khalil Dinkins. You have Luke Reynolds. Andrew Rapplier is supposed to be back. Joey Schlaffer, I think, surprisingly, has not entered the transfer portal. It's really just been Jerry Cross, right? And I think so there's all this. I don't think people realize how stacked Penn State is at other position groups. It's just wide receiver is such an outlier here, and it's just brought into the spotlight. But Michigan did it for 2023. Oh, Connor Stallions. No. Let's talk about football and X's and O's for a moment. Who did Michigan have? What did they rely on? They relied on elite defense, a solid quarterback in J.J. McCarthy at the time, and Donovan Edwards and Blake Corum, an all-out, all-star offensive line, and Roman Wilson. Can Kyron Hudson be good enough to be comparable to Roman Wilson? I think so. Devontae Ross gives you a deep threat to give you some, just again, force the safeties to respect you. I think so. So that's kind of, let's get into that. Let's take another break and talk about that. The 2025 outlook, should they be title favorites? Not just considered, a playoff contender. No, should they be considered title favorites? Well, Pat and I are going to wrap up the show with that on the other side of this break. And today's show is also brought to you by Prizepicks. This message brought to you by Prizepicks, the place where you can get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings, Prizepicks has changed the game in daily fantasy sports. Whether it's the playoffs or the regular season, Prizepicks has made it easier than ever to win big while enjoying all of the great sports action. But now it's playoff time, and there's no better way to get in on the action with Prizepicks. Here's how it works. You simply pick more or less than on at least two players. And then if your picks hit, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. That's right, 1,000 times your money just by making a few simple choices. This weekend, let's look at the playoffs for this weekend. This week on Prizepicks, I'm looking at players like Lamar Jackson for more than 250 passing yards, Travis Kelce for more than 70 receiving yards. And it's fun to predict and easy to play. Plus, with Prizepicks' flex play, you can still double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. And with the app, you get your winnings fast, sometimes in as little as 15 minutes. Get ready to run your game this football season. Download the app today and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege and get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That is right, $50 just for playing. Don't wait, take your game to the next level with Prizepicks. That is Prizepicks. Run your game. All right, the final segment is going to be pretty interesting here because Penn State, I don't view Penn State as just this. Now, they have a tough schedule. Oregon and Ohio State. But it is, here's the thing. The expectations are going to be high for Penn State. It's not just about getting to the postseason. The conversation's already started. They have to win a Big Ten title. They have to at least, honestly, I think at least make the national championship because they've clearly gone all in on the 2025 season, getting Singleton and Allen back. Drew Aller, all of these guys could have gone off to the NFL. They had respectable draft grades enough. If you want to try to dunk on Drew Aller and make fun of him and whatever else and say that, he's an XFL quarterback, he's a Canadian Football League quarterback, fine. But we're actually talking ball here. Drew Aller had a first round grade. There's an NFL franchise that would have taken him somewhere in the first round, yes, for the 2025 NFL draft. Because of his intangibles, in terms of what he offers and potential. Whether you think he's ready right now, fine. But I don't think there was a team that was ready to make him an NFL starter, but still they like the potential that it's worth taking him in the first round. Singleton and Allen, according to Mel Kiper Jr., whether you like him, you love him, you hate him, he had hit those guys as the 5th and 6th best running backs in his draft rankings. That gets you taken in the 3rd, 4th round as a running back potentially. All those guys are passing that up. Denai Dennis Sutton probably was going to be selected in the 3rd round. And they're all coming back. Of course, they are losing KJ Winston, Jalen Reed, and now Kobe King officially. But they get back Dom DeLuca. They are getting King Mack in the transfer portal. They have a chance. Yeah, return of the Mac. They have an opportunity to upgrade at defensive coordinator. Tom Allen was good, but can they get even better? Potentially, depending on who they ultimately hire. Danton Lynn. But I think Penn State is set up very well to a point where they should be considered one of the favorites. Do you look at them as the title favorite, one of the favorites? They still need to show you more. I have them as one of the favorites because Oregon is going to spend a bunch of money. Georgia's going to be back in it, right? They're going to have the opportunity to rebuild, reload. Of course, Ohio State, right? A lot of these teams that I'm naming are from the Big Ten. Oregon, Ohio State, Michigan's going to get better too. So it will be interesting, but Penn State, with what it's returning, and these other teams still have turnover. They got to figure things out, but Penn State has a bulk of its roster returning from a national semifinal team.
I have to do a lot more research as far as, what other teams are getting back, but they're not getting back. I think today or tomorrow is today or tomorrow the NFL draft declaration deadline. I think, right? Am I wrong on that?
15th. Should be
yeah.
the 15th.
Okay. So I think it is today as we speak. But either way, right? We still need to figure out what exactly teams are returning. We'll see what transfer portal is kind of closing up as we speak, but we'll have that spring one as well. But I think that, and to take it back to the wide receiver discussion, I do think if Penn State had landed a Malachi Fields from Virginia, a Casey Concepcion from NC State,
it would have been nice.
Yeah, a Dane Key from Kentucky, right? Somebody who's been a proven. I hear so often the term like number one wide receiver, when that doesn't necessarily mean someone who's going to be a first or second round pick. Like everyone, when you say number one wide receiver in college, people think of like Jeremiah Smith, and that's not quite attainable.
He's the exception. He's the exception.
Right? But just if they just had a little bit more full on proven at wide receiver, I do think that they would certainly be 1, 2, 3. I think right now you'll see them kind of hover in that 5, 6 area. Maybe you'll see them at 4. Maybe they do get as high as 3 for some people. But, it's going to be the normal cast of characters. Ohio State does lose a lot, though. They went they went all in on this year. They're going to lose basically their entire defensive line. And of course, they're going to have guys that are coming up, but they're going to lack some experience. They're starting a new quarterback as well. It's probably going to be former 5-star Julian Sayin, but
first-year starter.
Yep, first-year starter is only going to be in his second year with the program. Oregon, again, they were another team that kind of did go pretty all in on this coming season. They've been recruiting better than they have in the past, so we'll see on that. I think Texas, as far as I don't think you mentioned Texas. Texas is going to be really intriguing just because I know they have some pieces defensively as far as their defensive end, Colin Simmons, their linebacker, Anthony Hill. So two just bona fide, absolute first-rounders, leading that defense. And then we finally do see Arch, which I am Arch truther.
Yeah, that Manning kid.
the Manning kid. I am an Arch truther. I think Arch is going to be really, really good. So, yeah, it's funny in that, you mentioned the wide receiver thing for Penn State. If Drew Aller had gone out in that Orange Bowl, and let's say that Penn State still loses, but he doesn't throw – it ended up just being one interception, but doesn't have the 2 other interceptions that get called back because of penalties.
Or completes a routine pass.
Yeah, right. If he throws for 220 yards, he has one.
The
touchdown
difference is
passing.
one play.
Yeah,
the difference is one play.
One touchdown running. If he just has a little bit better of a day, I think the expectation for Penn State and just the perception of Penn State going into next season it would be a little bit different. Not to say it's bad, because again, they're going to most likely be a top 5 team going into the year. But as far as, being the title favorite, I think that James Franklin, for right or for wrong, he's going to have to prove that he can, beat the teams that are equal to him. And same with Drew. People are, making their jokes about him as far as, not showing up in the Orange Bowl. And that's going to be something that, as he said, he's going to take it on the chin and get better from it. And, I know that, you are a Drew Aller fan. I'm obviously a massive Drew Aller fan as well. And there's not a quarterback that I would change. There's not a quarterback out there that I would want to have instead of Drew Aller. So exciting times for Penn State. Even the title favorite or not the title favorite, getting Singleton, getting Catron, getting Deny, Zane Durant, all these 2022 recruiting class guys back. And, I understand this makes me sound like a little bit of a homer, but these guys care about Penn State. Deny loves Penn State. Drew loves Penn State. Nick, Catron, they love Penn State. Zane Durant's a Florida guy. He loves Penn State. All these guys have had opportunities, including Abdul Carter, have had opportunities to go elsewhere. The SEC schools have been trying to get them since they've enrolled at Penn State to go there. They want to be here. They want to win at Penn State. And I still think that means something. in the game of college football. And it's an exciting time to be a Penn State fan, and to be able to root for a team like that is going to be really fun. So title favorites or not, who really knows at this point, but it's certainly up there. They're going to have a puncher's chance.
When I'm projecting for the 2025 season, I can have confidence and optimism in the fact, how often in this age of the transfer portal and NIL and everything else, where you get 4-year players at your program, the consistency, the continuity, and the talent to go along with it. Drew Aller was a 5-star for a reason. Dennis Sutton was a 5-star for a reason. Nicholas Singleton was a 5-star for a reason. Katron Allen was a high up 4-star. All of those guys are back for their 4th seasons, and for some of them, their 4th year starting. Drew Aller is a 3rd-year starting quarterback at the same program. How often are you going to be able to say that ever again? Dennis Sutton is going to be a 4th-year player, co-starter the one season, and then now third. So essentially 3 years starting. And then Singleton and Allen. They're co-starters. It's not, he's one, he's the backup. No, these
they might finish 1-2 on Penn State's all-time career rushing leaders. They're both like 1,000 away from Royster, which is crazy to think about.
What a great excuse for the bookstore to redo the stairs, right? For both, and at least the work happens right there, so you have the 2 running backs right at the same time. So Singleton and Allen are. Well, they can be receivers. They can catch the ball out of the backfield. They're going to force defenses, and that's what Michigan relied on, is my point. That is why I'm confident that Penn State can really contend for a national title. They are going all in 2025, like Ohio State did for this season, like Michigan did for the year before. You have a veteran quarterback. Drew Aller is not bad. Did he have a bad game in the Orange Bowl? Yes, but he is not a bad quarterback. Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton are elite and should have gone off to the NFL, but they are back. That is your comparison, and I think they're better than Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards, but that is your comparable too. You have a 2 dynamic duo running back setup, and then now you need to make sure that the defense is as elite as it can be. But even if you look at that Michigan team, Roman Wilson, Colston Loveland really wasn't at his peak yet. I compare Luke Reynolds and Khalil Dinkins to Tyler Warren and Theo Johnson from the 2023 season. Even though Warren wasn't that Heisman contender, he was still competent and capable. And that's what Penn State's going to rely on. And it's also year 2 of Andy Kotelnicki. So there's no adjusting changes to the system. This is Drew Aller in year 4, year 3 of starting, year 2 in Andy Kotelnicki's system. You don't get a better setup than that going into this 2025 season across the board.
And even beyond those star players, right? The Drew Allers and the Singletons are rightfully getting the headlines, but Smith Bilber, 7-year guy, loves Penn State. You're not here 7 years. His first defensive line coach was Sean Spencer. That is how long Smith Bilber has been at.
That's like a trivia question.
Yeah, Deion Barnes was playing in one of like those weird football leagues in 2019. I can't think of which one it was off the top of my head, but he was still like an active, like trying to be a professional football player. Yeah. That's how long Smith Bilber has been here. Nick Dawkins, the mayor of State College himself, coming back for another year. Nick Dawkins loves Penn State. So just even that you're getting the star players back. That's one thing. Nick Singleton knows his role. Katron Allen knows his role. Dennis Sutton knows his role. But to get somebody back like Smith Bilber, who may start, may not start, to have Zariah Fisher coming back from injury as a
Keon Wiley
guy. Yeah, Keon Wiley, another guy who these are all guys who in a lot of other programs would have transferred. Keon Wiley would have went to Syracuse. Smith Bilber would have went to Rutgers. Zariah Fisher would have went to Pitt, right? Just talking like the local teams. Mm-hmm. Instead, they're here at Penn State because they believe in Penn State, because they believe in the coaching staff, because they believe that they can win here and that they can flourish here. So goes beyond the star guys. The Drew Allers and the Nick Singletons are nice, but this is a deep roster that not a lot of other programs have as far as the experience and the talent. Because when you combine those two, it's a beautiful thing.
And that's the best way to sum it up and how we're going to wrap up this show. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining this live edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. Pat Koerbler of Black Shoe Diaries joining us. Please go check out his work. It will be linked down in the description as this show comes to a conclusion. Pat, thanks so much for the time. Thank you, everybody, for spending your Wednesday night with us, and we'll see how the defensive coordinator search comes to an end, right? Who Penn State ultimately chooses.
Dan Lynn, come home. Come home, Dan. Come on.
And I gotta imagine that's the pitch, right? You're a former player. be a part of history for the first time for a Penn State team to win a national title since the 1980s, because not everybody counts 1994. So why not be a part of that history as a former player, right? But that has to be the only pitch other than money.
Yeah, I saw that Stephon Morris, a former teammate of his, quote tweeted one of the Dan Lynn reports about him interviewing at Penn State or Penn State going after him, and he's the one that said come home. So I like to think that hopefully, Stephon Morris and some of his other former teammates that played with Danton are reaching out to him. I don't think Semitis and him, I know Semitis is on staff, I don't think Semitis and Lynn ever crossed over. Yeah, Semitis was done in 2005. I don't think Connor did either. Connor was done. But either way, main point being that I'm sure all the Penn State lettermen that played, Jordan Hill is on staff at Penn State, will be reaching out to Lynn and say, hey, man, come on. 1 year. Let's do it. So we'll see. Thank you, Zach, for having me on.
2025 is supposed to be the all-in year, and we'll see how it continues because the work's not done. Portal window, defensive coordinator search, and everything. But, Pat, thank you so much for the time to talk and analyze all of it here on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much, Zach. Appreciate it.